I invited a neighbour to church recently and he made a joke I've heard many times before. He said, "I hope you have a strong roof." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, because if I step through the door of the church, the roof is liable to cave in." Many people feel too sinful for church, too sinful to have anything to do with God, and the roof will cave in if it happens. I wonder what Jesus would say about that. Well, in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is in a very unchurchy setting. He's at a party thrown by the most notorious sinners of the region. Matthew chapter 9, verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew the tax collector's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Think of the guest list at this party. Tax collectors were universally hated. They were collaborators with the enemy, the Roman overlords. And they were white-collar criminals. They were stealing far too much money from their own people, all in order to prop up the Roman regime. Naturally, Matthew's friends were not upstanding Jews either. They were other tax collectors and sinners, notorious lawbreakers and miscreants. This is a very unchurchy environment indeed. Perhaps we think the roof should cave in on them, or that Jesus should come down on them like a ton of bricks. But no, Jesus is happily eating and drinking with them. He wants to share life with the lowest of the low. Appalled by this, the Pharisees do something very strange. They gate crash the party and then complain about the guest list. That's an odd tactic for a gate crasher, don't you think? If I was a gate crasher, I think I'd keep quiet about the guest list, yeah? But these religious policemen are so outraged at Jesus' choice of dinner companions that they cannot remain silent. When Jesus hears their complaint, though, he's got words of his own. From the heart of the party, Jesus pipes up in verse 12 and says, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick." This is how we can understand Jesus' decision to feast with sinners. He's a doctor. And when you understand that about Jesus, you understand everything. Everything starts to make sense when you understand that Jesus is the doctor. Now, I'm a man, so I never go to the doctor. I complain about every cough and cold as though it's bubonic plague, but I don't go to the doctor. And if I ever do, I like to save up my sicknesses until I have a decent list. Do you ever do that? Why do we do that? Because I think we're afraid of sitting down with the doctor and saying, "I've got this wrong with me, this wrong with me, this wrong with me." And they just say, "Well, that's nothing, that's nothing, that's nothing. You're wasting my time." We don't want to waste their time. Nobody sits down with the doctor and says, "I'm a picture of perfect health. I thought you'd be impressed." They won't be impressed. If you do that, you're wasting their time. Doctors are for sick people. And Jesus is for sinners. Only for sinners. What is a sinner? Well, Jesus likens sin here to sickness. It's not really about the individual mistakes that we've made. You know, I feel guilty for all sorts of things that I've done in my past. Some of them, it's a right kind of guilt. Some of them, it's not really a right guilt. But the problem goes deeper than my feelings. All those sins are like the spots that you get when you have chickenpox. You ever had chickenpox? These spots come to the surface and they're obvious to everyone. They're horrible, ugly, embarrassing, itchy, shameful. But the real problem is not the spots. The real problem is an underlying sickness. And my sins, my spots if you like, my sins, my spots will look different to yours. My sickness might show itself in pride and anger. Yours might come out as greed and gossip, and some will have really gross and obvious symptoms like a tax collector. Some have obvious spots, some not so obvious. Some are good at covering their spots, some are not. But we all have the same disease. And we cannot cure ourselves. This sickness is not in our hair, or we could shave it off. It's not a skin complaint, or we could buy an ointment. It's not in our hand or in our leg, or we could amputate. No, we have a sickness that is in our bones, in our blood, in our brain and heart and soul. We have a chronic terminal illness called sin. And if we never come to the doctor, that sickness will go on forever. We've spoken about hell before as we've travelled through the Bible. This passage gives us one more window onto that dreaded reality. Hell is our sick human condition that is never taken to Jesus, never healed by the doctor, just allowed to progress and deteriorate eternally. But here's the shock about hell. Hell is for the righteous. Hell is for those who consider themselves healthy, for those who refuse the doctor's care. Jesus, you see, is not the spiritual prize giver, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. Jesus is the spiritual doctor, attending to the sick, and only the sick. A doctor cannot help you if you claim to be well, and Jesus cannot help you if you claim to be righteous. Do you claim to be righteous? Or do you realize that you are a sinner? Do you know that you need the doctor? The Bible is clear, and Jesus is clear, that no one is actually righteous. Yet tragically, there are millions who fake it. They cover up their spots, they act healthy, and the doctor passes them by. Jesus is for sinners, only for sinners. In fact, written across the gateway of heaven could be the sign, sinners only. The righteous need not apply. That's what I said to my neighbour when he said he was too sinful for church, when he said that the roof would cave in on him because he was such a sinner. I told him about this story, and I said, thinking that you're too sinful for Jesus is like thinking you're too sick for the doctor. Your sins cannot disqualify you from church any more than sickness disqualifies you from the hospital. This is the true nature of Christianity. It's not prize giving for the talented. It's health care for the sick. Because Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners.